thank you very much for coming. So we're going to show what is behind our website, conflictforecast.org. This is based on some academic work, which dates back many years. And our latest paper there is called The Hard Problem of Prediction for Conflict Prevention. And Hannes Mueller and I, Christopher Rauh, we're going to run you through the steps that bring us to our risk predictions and why we're even doing this. So here we see a few facts about countries. In the left panel, we see the number of countries experiencing any fatality per month. We can see that this number is consistently high and actually even seems to be increasing a bit. So more than 30 countries have been experiencing at least one fatality in a month over the past years. And in the middle panel, you can see the logged total number, so it's a log scale, the total number of fatalities over time. And you can see that there's about 10,000 fatalities every month across the world. And this is a consistently high number. So conflicts are still important and are causing many deaths. And then in the right panel, you can see the outbreaks, the onsets of conflict every month. And also here you can see that it's not just the same conflict that is going on the whole time, but that about 5 countries per month is experiencing some outbreak from non-conflict to some at least one fatality in any given month. Okay, so all these 3 graphs show that conflicts are still a problem. And in particular, what we think is a problem is that current conflicts and recovering countries are receiving much more attention. And this is because these are much more salient. This is what you see in the news. This is what politicians discuss. But there has been some attention to the problem of destabilizing countries. So the review of the United Nations peacebuilding architecture in 2015 said, if more global priority were consistently given to efforts at sustaining peace, might there not, over the course of time, be reduced need for crisis response? So that's the first hint that maybe we should not just look at countries that are already experiencing violence, but look at those that are still peaceful but might fall into violence. And then a report that Hannes contributed to from the World Bank and the United Nations, the Pathways for Peace, Inclusive Approaches to Preventing Violent Conflict, Hannes actually managed to put a number on it that about 34 billion, under some assumptions, could be saved per year by intervening in just 5 countries per year. So intervention really could pay a huge dividend. Here we can see on the x-axis the months that have passed since your last battle death. And on the y-axis, we have the probability that you're again going to experience a battle death. Okay, and what you can see is that as time passes, this probability drops drastically. So those countries that have just come out of conflict, they experience one peaceful month, they then have a 40% probability of relapsing into conflict after 1 month. After 2 months, this is less, but still very high. But basically what this is summarizing is the conflict trap. If you once had conflict, you're very likely to fall back into conflict. And now here I'm just expanding the x-axis. So now the months since the last battle death are much longer. And now you can see it much more extremely that right after, there's a huge risk. And then the risk becomes very small, okay? Now this is in one way great, more peace, but from a prediction perspective, this is difficult. So how are we going to predict these sudden outbreaks, which are particularly painful because of the conflict trap? If we put some numbers on it, in the first 10 years following a conflict, the relapse probability is about 12%. Now, after 10 peaceful years, the probability drops to about 0.5%. Okay, and these first onsets, so these outbreaks of conflict, are what we call the hard problem. Now, if you imagine if you avoid one of these hard problem outbreaks, in the next 5 years, you would be saving 14 months of conflict and almost 7,000 fatalities. Because this is what, on average, occurs if a previously peaceful country falls into 1 month of violence. So we think it's particularly important to avoid this conflict trap before it happens. And that's what's underlying the idea underlying our website, we want to improve predictions. And this we do by aggregating timely expert information, which gives us long time series to train machine learning. And we do this through unsupervised machine learning. So we do a topic model, which summarizes news text. And then we feed these topics into supervised machine learning. So the appearance and the disappearance of topics can give us a warning of where conflict might break out. And this is where this map then comes from, which you can see on our website. So to give you a better idea of what we do with this news data. So first of all, what news data do we even have? So we have about 1 million newspaper articles from the New York Times and The Economist. And then we have about 4 million articles from the BBC Monitor, which, and the Associated Press and Latin News. So these three are news monitors, aggregators. They cover the entire world and also use multiple languages and regional news sources. And what's the idea of this approach is the editors and the journalists, they filter and translate information, and we can then learn from this information. And the criteria we use, we download an article and assign it to a country of the country name or capital assigns in the title. So in total, we have more than 5 million articles of about 190 countries from 1980 until today. So this gives us a long time series, which is particularly important in order to be able to train a machine learning algorithm. And this machine learning algorithm, we use the latent Dirichlet allocation to summarize the news first. And I want you to imagine this as an urn where journalists draw from when they're writing about topics. So if a journalist writes about sports, they'll go to the sports urn, and there the words will be things like team, goal, win. If they write about conflict, they go to the conflict urn, and there they will draw words like war, violence, army, or win. So you can already see win is in both of these urns. So each word can be in every urn. Yeah? And each article can be a mixture of urns. So for instance, if in soccer, a journalist will write about Barca against Real Madrid, a long-standing rivalry, then the journalist will probably be drawing from both the sports urn and the conflict urn. So that's the idea of this topic model. And to make it a bit more intuitive, I'd like to present this article to you, which is more or less randomly chosen. It's the Libyan prince confronts rebels. What we do is we remove words that don't really contain information. So they're called stop words. Then we chop words into their stem. Okay, so you can see that remaining turns into remain and so on. So then the words will look like this. So this is the bag of words that is now going to be fed into the algorithm. But it's not just this article. It's going to be 5 million articles as a matrix. And then the word counts are there. Okay, and so it's about 100,000 words, and 2 and 3 word combinations are also there. So we feed this into the algorithm, and out come the topics. We specify the number of topics, but nothing else, basically. And what you can see is here's, for instance, an economics topic. We call it economics because there's words such as economy, bank, financial, invest, fund. These are the most prominent words. Yeah, so you have to imagine a word here is proportional to the importance of that word within a topic. This is what we call the tourism topic. Why? Because of words like all these things we don't remember anymore. Museum, wine, well, wine we might remember, but travel, Italian, tourist. And then this seems to be a conflict topic. Force, fight, military, army, rebel. These are the important words of this topic. So remember, I showed you that article before, and now I'm going to summarize it for you through these topics. Okay, because for the sake of time, I didn't want you to read the entire article. So this article receives about 4% of tourism topic. Where does this association come from? From words like journey, train, flight. Okay, so Rome, that's why it receives some association with tourism. Very low, only 4%, but that's where the association comes from. It receives only 2% of economics, and that's because of words like govern, country, state. So these are somewhat economic-y words, and therefore, but very low, only 2%. However, it receives 27% of the conflict topic. Okay, and this association comes from words like force, guerrilla, border, fight, troop, army. Okay, so this is how the algorithm decides how much, so what words are in which topic and how much of each topic is in each article. So after we've done this, this topic model, what we have is we know how much was reported about each country over time. So we know that 17% of what was written in March 2003 in Great Britain or the United Kingdom was about economics. Okay, that's the idea. And then we know how much was written the next month. So we know the appearance and the disappearance of topics, which we can then feed into supervised machine learning algorithm, which detects positive and negative association between these news topics and the outbreak of violence. And that's the idea behind the production of these risk measures that you see in our website, which Hannes is now going to tell you a lot more about.
Thank you, Christopher. Hello, everyone. Please leave your questions in the Google Doc. Don't be shy. Like you can also criticize us without asking a question. It's also fine, or give suggestions about future things you would like to see on the webpage. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the topics first, because they are the raw material of the webpage, and I think they are kind of a substantial part of what goes into our forecast. And then I will present a little bit the webpage and the idea behind the webpage more in detail. So let me first share my slides. Christopher talked about the topics that come out of our topic model, right? As I said, these are, as he said, these are completely given by the algorithm. We don't choose them, and we just name them in hindsight. So we go through the list of words and we give the topic a name. And so what I'm showing you here is the United States in April 2021. And this information is also available on the webpage. You can also download it on the webpage. And you see that there's a lot of talking about diplomacy. So this is basically the Biden government reaching out to the world and doing diplomatic things, and see some share of civilian life and economics. I'm showing you another country just to make clear how this changes, right? And so this is Syria in April 2021. And of course, you should see a dramatic difference to the United States, right? You see a lot more writing is happening on armed conflict. There is some diplomacy happening, but there is much less talk about, say, economics and competition in sports, say, right? So this is not part of what people talk about or write about when they write about Syria. And so what our model uses, our forecasting model uses, is these kind of changes or levels of reporting on different countries. Here's Mexico, and Mexico is also very high risk. And what you see here already is that many different constellations of topics can lead to a high risk estimate in our forecast. And this is kind of the strange thing about machine learning, that sometimes it gives you very nonlinear combinations of different topics that lead to a scoring at the end that is quite interesting, right? So here it's probably judiciary and abuses that leads to the higher risk score. Of course, armed conflict also plays a role in reporting on Mexico. So let me also show you a little bit of a timeline. So how this looks over time. This is not information that we share on the webpage, but it's something that you could construct for yourself when you download our data. So this is based on all the articles that we have downloaded for India, and we have classified all the articles, and we're giving these topic shares also in the download section of the webpage. And what you see here is the share that two distinct topics have in India, right? So we have these two topics, economics, religious tensions and economics, right? I show you this again. So this is economics and this is religious tensions. Religious tensions is almost not reported on in Mexico, which makes sense, right? But it's something that was very rarely reported on in India. And then more recently, under the Modi government, this has exploded, right? So this is exactly capturing things that are happening in India. There's much less and less reporting on economics, talk about India, and there's a lot more reporting on religious tensions. Here's another example, namely Venezuela. Venezuela, of course, has relatively a lot of reporting on energy and industry, which is another topic that our algorithm finds in the articles. But this is also declining in the period that I'm showing you here between 2010 and 2020. And at the same time, a topic called armed conflict is starting to pick up, right? And of course, this is also very indicative of high risks, right? The armed conflict topic is obviously related to risk of armed conflict because journalists start to write about armed conflict before it actually starts to happen, right? They compare a situation in a country to other countries where armed conflict has happened, or they use words that are associated with armed conflict, like the formation of armed groups, etc. And so this is how we forecast. This is the raw material for our forecast. And let me show you basically what happens before the outbreak of a conflict. And this is now kind of, I'm ordering the data according to what is written about before a conflict breaks out at 0. And what you see here is that armed conflict is rising consistently. The share that is written on armed conflict is rising consistently and then explodes 1 month before the conflict breaks out, right? But you see already that there's a plateau here, which is reached around a year before. So we can get some signal into our forecasting model by just following the armed conflict topic before armed conflict breaks out. But there's additional things, right? For example, foreign policy, and I'm just giving you one example of several topics that behave this way. Foreign policies, news on foreign policy are declining and declining very fast before conflict breaks out. And the same thing, same pattern for economics and judiciary and abuses. So these are stories on police arresting people, courts condemning them, and riots and judicial procedures. Basically, these tend to increase before conflict breaks out, and economics news stories tend to fall before conflict breaks out, right? So our model, our supervised model, uses all these kind of constellations to predict conflict risk. And this is a view inside a topic, right? So this is the health and emergencies topic. And I'm showing you here how this topic adapts basically to the coronavirus arriving. And this is done completely, fully automatically by the LDA that Christopher presented already. So this is December 2019. And this is how the arrival of the coronavirus shapes this topic, right? So the algorithm, quote unquote, understands that this is a health and emergency vocabulary that is used in these articles that are talking about the coronavirus. And of course, you see the virus and the word virus and coronavirus appearing very large and very prominently in this topic. I'm going back and forth between 2019 December and February 2020, right? And then in February, nowadays, you see also vaccine and these kind of words arising. So the topics are adapting to the international context that the world is in. And so this makes us very, very confident that we can pick up new things as they happen, because the topic model basically picks them up and categorizes them. So let me now quickly go to the webpage and just to give you a quick run through the webpage. So this is our webpage. This is what you see when you arrive basically on the page. And this is a map that gives you a very crude overview over the risks in the world. And I'm just going to take, by the way, just going to take 5 more minutes to explain this very quickly, and then we can go to questions if there are any. And so you can browse around, and you can also search for a country if you want to. Let me go now to Tunisia, because I think this is a very interesting country. If you click on a country, it opens the risk view. And in this view, you can choose the different models you would like to look at. So this is the armed conflict model 12 months ahead or 3 months ahead. And you can see that the curves will change as a function of what I'm clicking on here. And let me explain very briefly what these two curves are. And I think this is very important to understand our webpage. Every point here in this curve is the forecast that our model gave with the information available at that date. So say where I'm here with my cursor right now, the 1st of April in 2011, we had the information basically that was available in March, right? So this is the March information that is available now. And we're doing forecasts using the March information. And this is basically what this is. This is like the out of sample, so to speak, risk forecast 12 months ahead of armed conflict. We are predicting 2 different levels of violence, because this is surprisingly giving you different answers depending on the context about how risky a country is. Armed conflict is more intense. This is a kind of when an entire country starts to destabilize, and any violence could be any small event that happens. And what you see here is 2 different models. I'm giving you, we're always showing what we call the best model. This is using the fact that conflict tends to follow other outbreaks of conflict, other outbreaks of violence. So there's conflict dynamics that are ruling the risk, and adding our topics to this. And the text model is only using the topics, and it completely ignores the fact that conflict tends to follow risk, and so tends to follow conflict. And so what the text model does typically, it is better in picking up newly arising risks, because it puts more attention to kind of the text and tries to understand whether the text is subtle signals are hidden inside the text. And this is exactly what you see for Tunisia. So you see the Arab Spring, of course, happening, and the risk estimates start to go up with protests on the streets, right? And political turmoil as it happened in Tunisia. And you see then the best model reacts with the risk once violence actually breaks out. So this is when terror attacks happened in Tunisia, the best model basically updates and starts to say, well, this seems to be a very high risk country, right? And this is the logic that always happens when you have isolated conflict events, that the best model starts to update and then says this is very high risk. And then, of course, some of the fluctuations you see here are driven by the text, but this big jump here is driven by the outbreak of violence. Now, if you want to understand where this comes from, you can go to the conflict view, so the topic view, and you can look at the topics and you can click on everything, right? So the thing I showed you before, health and emergencies, you can also see it here, right? So this is the composition of the health and emergencies topic in April 2021. I'm almost done. It depends a little bit on how many questions there are. I could keep on and show you a bit more examples, but I guess it's a good idea to now basically open the floor. And so I'll stop here. And maybe one last thing I want to say is that we have a download section where everything can be downloaded. You can always download all our forecasts of the different models, and in every of these files there's both the best model and the text model, and you see the 12 ahead armed conflict, 3 ahead armed conflict, 12 ahead any violence, and you can also download past forecasts that we gave. As we're changing the model, they might be changing over time, so it's very important to keep a memory basically of what we predicted in the past. Okay, so let me quickly go to the Google Doc. I'm going to stop sharing now. I think that you know whether there's questions already, or
there are a few questions already. So I can read you the first one, and then you can answer it.
Okay.
Okay. We know that the mainstream news reports underreport the actions of non-violent actions. There's a general bias against it. Prevalence of non-violent actions is a sign of conflict, not necessarily confined to liberal democracies. Does this bias in the data set concern you? Do you think that lack of non-violent reporting can hide the existence of conflict and only expose violent conflict?
Yes, no, absolutely. But I think that I would go further. The way we train the model, right? We are focusing on violent conflict, right? So we rely on the UCDP definition of conflict and violent conflict, and therefore we definitely don't capture the risk of non-violent conflict. I hope this answers the question. I think we could even almost open the floor if you want to step forward and you want to ask us in person. I think that's also a possibility, given that we are like a group of 20 people now.
Okay. Can I
yes,
ask?
Go ahead. Yes.
It's very interesting project that you presented very well. So one of the questions I have is, as you know, conflict now tends to be more and more localized, and the issue of predicting conflict at subnational level is becoming very important. So is there a way to kind of customize this to predict conflict at local level is one of my questions. And the other is, so about other data sources, using data sources like GDELT, for instance, has a huge amount of information compared to the selective news sources you used. So is it not interesting to look at into a bunch of information out there to kind of run your model? Thank you so much.
Christopher, I leave the first question to you, but I will answer the second one now that I have my mic open. Yara, thank you very much for these questions. This is very good. Both are very good points. Actually, both are also things we're working on. So you hit exactly our nerve. Regarding the GDELT, we did try this, and it's very surprising. If you use GDELT alone, it leads to much worse forecasts than our topics, which I find personally a little bit puzzling, because GDELT, of course, is like an amazing data provider, right? It scrapes many more news than we do, and even has this event coder behind it, which is very sophisticated and puts everything into different events, right? Protests, demonstrations, threats, everything until violence. And so you should think that it would improve our forecast, or would even do a better job than the topics. Let me give you a little interpretation of why I think it isn't doing that well. First of all, we need long time series. So it's very important, like Christopher said this already, if you want to train an algorithm to spot something that happens only very rarely, right? These new outbreaks in countries that were previously peaceful, like think of, I'm saying random countries that are having escalating risks right now, right? So think of the Czech Republic, Hungary, South Africa, right? So these are mix of countries that you wouldn't think immediately, oh yeah, these are countries in the middle of a civil war, right? So if you want to track risks in those countries, we need very long time series, because we need the new outbreaks that happen. And what GDELT did is it always scraped everything that it could get. So you get very inconsistent sources over time since the 80s, right? Of course, with the advance of the internet, GDELT as a data hungry basically program is scraping more and more, and it's putting more and more web pages into this, and so therefore you get very kind of wobbly kind of time series, and I think that's hindering the training. I also think that again, Christopher said this, what journalists do is they are experts, right? So they compare situations in other countries to something that is happening in a country, and therefore this is improving the forecast, because in a way we are piggybacking backing of like an expert opinion already in our use of news topics. I'll leave the other question to Christopher because he's working on that right now.
Yeah. So about the subnational or regional. So let me first answer is with what we have right now. So now our articles, our newspaper database is more assigned to countries. And so we haven't gone deep into this yet, but it looks like that we already can gain a lot of traction with that by interacting the conflict history in these regions with what is being written at the national level. So with what we have, we think that in the future we will be able to build quite easily a good predictor at the subnational level. Now, one could think in much bigger terms here. So if you had access to a lot more local newspaper sources, and you could really get articles and assign them to different regions. One could also, people use geocoders for articles and so on. So one could then even extend that and actually just replicate what we're doing now at a much bigger scale to the regional level. So I think we will first go down the first route because that is the data we have. And the problem about the second route is the same as Hannes just also mentioned about GDELT, is it's very hard to get this consistent long series of data access. So it will be hard to get newspapers that are available dating far back and in real time, basically, on regional at the regional level, so that we can assign to these subnational levels easily. But as I said, the first approach, you will probably see some results in a not too distant future on exploiting what we have.
Let me pick up two. Thanks everybody for writing your questions into the Google Doc. I think this is wonderful because we kind of take something home also with us. I'm going to answer two questions also from there again, just because I entered the document just now. And one was basically following up on the question of the latent conflict and whether we have a bias in a way. And I think maybe I misinterpreted that question a little bit, but I think one thing is very important, which is, of course, we rely on news reporting being possible, right? So if some news don't leave a country and they don't get reported at all, like, of course, that's something that we will not see, so to speak, and this will not be something that appears in our algorithm, in our forecast, therefore. But I would like to stress that the way we evaluate our own model is that we always put ourselves into the shoes of somebody who had information in the past, and we measure performance with our own model and check whether we would have been able to predict conflict. And we didn't see very strong patterns with regard to kind of what are the kind of countries where we can predict conflict. Of course, China here is a very important case and point. And I would like to point out that the model that you see when you enter the kind of country level is the armed conflict model, and that model is measured relative to a population. So it's 5 fatalities per 1 million inhabitants, and of course for China this is a very low risk, right? So because we need a lot of deaths for a country like China to reach this. If you go to the any violence measure, you immediately see that China goes up a lot. So it's not that we have a blind spot with respect to China or something that is going on here, right? So I think that you're fine, and mostly because we use the BBC Monitor as a tool, right? The BBC Monitor was designed to report, translate news from all of the world into English and kind of give a global view that is able to track most circumstances. This, of course, still means that we get less news for some countries. And of course, this is a problem that we have thin kind of news for some countries. I would also like to explain again the difference between the best model and the text model, because this was asked explicitly. And of course, this is the core of our webpage and therefore extremely important. we use two sets of information in these two models. The first one, the best model, uses conflict variables. So how many fatalities did you have in the past? So we use the UCDP numbers, and we say, how long was the last conflict ago? Like how many months was it ago that you had a conflict in the recent past? How many fatalities has this country experienced in the past? And we use these two variables inside the model, and the model actually takes out a lot of forecasting power from just these two variables. So it's a random forest, so it's able to do it non-linearly and kind of exploit these two sets of information in a lot of detail. So it's the history part. And then we add to that the topic shares, right? And so the best model uses the history and the topic shares, whereas the text model only uses the topic shares and doesn't use the conflict past. So you get basically an evaluation of how risky a country is without an understanding that a country just recently had a conflict in the text model. Right? The text model just tries to see constellations of text and how they describe risk, and tries to understand from past experiences of violence whether there's a risk in that country. And of course, what happens then is that the model becomes worse because conflict tends to follow conflict. But it also is better in picking up new developments that are happening in countries that didn't experience a conflict up until now, right? So kind of something like Tunisia before the first outbreak of conflict is a case like that. I hope that makes this clear. I don't know whether there's more in the Google Docs.
Yeah, I'll pick up on some of the questions there. So there's one question also then asks what is the connection to our tool to local organizations or on the ground units. So we are using these newspaper articles because that's what we have. So at one point we were also talking with people from the UN, because they have people sitting there writing reporting back to the headquarters. We have not yet gained any access to these sort of reports, but as Hannes also said, we're averaging over experts. So if we have some consistent, somewhat long history of information of experts, we can, with the same idea, feed that into this model. So there's very few specificities that we're not, this is not a tailored approach. We're really just feeding into the algorithm the information that is coming from the news. And then we feed that, and then yes, there are the questions about the biases, and surely there will be biases in reporting. But I've looked a bit into whether the different news sources we have report very differently about regions, and at the extensive margin, I would say yes. So BBC Monitor tends to report much more about Commonwealth, and Associated Press is of French origin, so much more about the former French colonies. But in terms of the distribution of what they're writing about, they're very similar. Okay, so maybe they're similarly biased. One could also argue they're both Western media outlets, but also if these biases are constant over time, then our prediction algorithm will also not have a problem with that, because then the patterns will always look the same. Of course, if there are drastic changes over time in the way these outlets report about places, given the same type of local events, then we will have to think about adapting our approach. So far, our investigations have not shown this problem.
So because we're running out of time now, I would like to suggest one thing, that maybe we stay active in the Google Doc if there's further questions. If you want to get in touch with us, please also contact us either on the conflictforecast.org webpage. There's a contact button there, or put your contacts into the Google Doc and write us an email, or leave your email and tell us to contact you. We'll be happy to kind of keep this conversation alive. And of course, this is very exciting for us to have kind of this kind of feedback to our efforts. I don't know whether there's any more uncovered question. I think we have one more question. If somebody wants to dare speak up immediately before I go read through the whole Google Doc. If you have another question, please let us know. No?
Sure, I can chime in.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you again. That last question about connecting to local organizations on the ground units, that was actually coming from me. And I kind of wanted to rephrase a little bit of what I was kind of hoping to answer. That was a good response. It kind of clarified, I think, a good direction for where you're going with your tool. What I was actually perhaps more interested in that question was that I didn't realize until after the fact was the lag that exists between running analytics and trying to gather this data and train models and run them, and then having them into the hands of units that are on the ground in a quick way so that they're still actionable. Because in certain theaters of action, your time span for what's relevant is not going to be down to a couple of days or a week. It's going to be down to a matter of hours or minutes or maybe seconds. And there are a lot of this information for detecting escalation can be very useful in those kinds of theaters, but those theaters are very fast moving. So how do we then, what's your ideas or your thoughts in terms of progressing this tool towards minimizing the lag that exists between our data collection analytics processes and analyses, and then creating something that's actionable within a time frame of maybe a couple of hours, maybe a day at most, really in that quick thing of just, we need to have, units or what have you in this location because we're detecting an escalation of tensions in this area, and we need to be moving at that pace because that's how quickly things can evolve in some of these conflict theaters.
Let me give a quick part, and then Hannes can say his part on this. This is a very good question. So one is it takes us a few days to get so each month we update, we download the new articles, and then so we're still fine tuning to make things faster, and then we have to estimate and so on. So it's a few days to get our new estimates for the next month out. Said that, most of the policymakers that we've been speaking with, there's political forces, and their things are a lot slower. They're often interested in forecasts like 6 months ahead, 12 months ahead. So, I think it depends very much on who the stakeholders are and who we're interacting with. Now, the way it is, we're not that fast yet, but so far the people that we've been interacting with, they have to, for them it's a lot of politics, so actors involved and people sitting at the table, so it's a lot slower. But of course, as you say, sometimes it would be nice to have something that can give you a daily update. And with newspaper text, in theory, this would be possible. We're not there yet, though. Hannes, if you want to expand.
Yeah, I want to say something very quickly. I think we just have 1 minute. Thanks a lot, Richard. I think one thing to know, and this is very, very important, is that the focus of this webpage is on low risks, right? So what you seem to describe is like escalations as they happen, right? Can we track escalations as they happen? And imagine that something is already breaking out, there is violence, and you want to keep track of what's happening. And I think that's where the high frequency that you're talking about is really important. I think that's where also machine learning could help, right? Understand these escalations with a lot of data that is coming in on a daily or minute or hourly basis. But this is very different from the kind of thing we have in mind. We have in mind of like, an environment of like 15%, a 10-15% risk in a 12 months horizon. So it's a very low risk. Think of Hungary right now, think of South Africa right now, and trying to understand those. And there we have more time to run our analysis and give feedback to the policymakers. But this is really because we're interested in those low risks environments mostly, right? We're not interested in what's happening next in Syria, what's happening next tomorrow, because for us, you see on the map, it's very high risk. Obviously, it's a very violent place. So the risk, so to speak, is already realized, right? It's very high risk because it's already in conflict. So thank you very much, everyone. I think that's us. We have to go. And yeah, please stay in touch with us. I'm also going to put my email if you want to write me. But I mean, Christopher left.
I put it in there. It's in the
perfect
document already.
Fantastic. Yeah. Great. So
thank you very much, everyone.
Yes, thanks a lot for your comments. Thanks a lot. See you around.